Rob Carr with the Illinois Retail Merchants Association. Thanks for joining us on a frigid day, and it's been sadly kind of a maybe cold day for sales or cold year for sales over the last year as we are here in the early part of 2021 and just marking about 1 year since the COVID pandemic came out. There's been some other issues as well impacting retail around Illinois. So we wanted to touch base with you and get caught up on just kind of where are we on the state of retail sales in Illinois. As we begin this, Rob, could you just kind of put in context, at least in a normal environment, how much of an impact are retail sales to the Illinois economy? In rough terms, what kind of maybe employment is it, and how much you add to the overall Illinois economy?
Sure, Terry, and it's great to be with you. So under normal circumstances, retail is the largest revenue generator for local governments, and we're the second largest for the state, just barely behind income tax. So it's not a stretch to say that as goes retail, so goes Illinois. Additionally, we are the largest employer at approximately 20% of employment. So you can see very quickly that it is significant that Illinois has a healthy, dynamic, vibrant retail sector.
And as we tape this now, the federal government just said we're going to have a $15 an hour. Well, it's not law as yet, but Illinois has already passed a $15 an hour minimum wage. I'm not sure where are we on that. As I recall, it kicks in about July, if I recall right. But where are we now at about $11 or $12 an hour?
Statewide, we're at $11. So that we had three increases in a year. I know the others, the proponents like to say 2 years, but it was really 366 days. So it's really a year. It went from $8.25 to $11 in three steps over the course of the year, which just happened to also coincide with the pandemic. So you've seen a 33% increase in the cost of labor, because remember, it's not just for those who are starting out. You then have to ratchet up the wages for those who have been there for a while. So it really ripples through the entire employment sector. And it makes it harder for retail, particularly during this pandemic when we have been closed, and significant portions have been closed, to have to also try to pay additional wages. It increases costs while your sales are down, and it makes it harder to rehire. So it will have negative impacts going forward.
It's kind of like kicking someone when they're down. I mean, when here they're dealing with the lack of traffic because of COVID and all the rest. So should we presume? I mean, that how much? It seems just disastrous on its surface for the retail merchants around the state because of the pandemic, because of the increase in the cost of labor, and how are you dealing with that? Are you proposing? I'm just throwing this out there to say, hey, can we pause the increase in the minimum wage so that our merchants can kind of catch their breath economically, get back in the game? Because no one, the governor and the legislature, didn't know the COVID was coming when they passed this labor increase. We just, and it seems to me the last thing we want to do is gut our retail foundation. As you just explained, it's so critical to the state financially that, by the time we come out of this pandemic, what good is it if we've killed off 50% or more of our retail establishments? I don't want to overstate the case. I'm just trying to illustrate the point. Why don't you give us an overview as you see it?
Your point's well made, and that we have twice proposed that the minimum wage increases be delayed a year. We didn't suggest they be repealed; they simply be delayed a year in recognition of the impact that the pandemic is having on everyone. Keep in mind, Illinois and other states are also experiencing historic unemployment as a result of the pandemic. So increasing costs makes it harder to ultimately get people back to work. It makes it harder for existing businesses to keep their doors open. At every turn, the governor has rejected that suggestion. They have also suggested that their big grants and others have helped fill the gap, but those have been so small and have only been received by approximately 20% of those who have applied, that it covers a very small segment. Now, are we thankful that they did the big grants? Absolutely. but it doesn't become an offset for the minimum wage or for increased property taxes or for the increased cost of goods that our retailers are paying for, particularly grocers right now. So it doesn't offset any of those costs. And it does make it ultimately harder for us to A, stay open, B, recover, frankly, and ultimately hire back the people who have been unemployed.
There was a piece of legislation you had mentioned to me off camera, and I think most people don't know about the Marketplace Fairness Bill, I believe. What is
Yes,
that, and just give us an update on what that is and what it accomplished.
Sure, it's the Marketplace Fairness Act. It was passed in October of 2019. I'm sorry, it became effective in October. It was passed in October of 2019, effective January 1 of 2019. And what it did is,
You mean
for the
2020?
year 2020. Thank you. For the year 2020, remote sellers had to collect the state's use tax, the 6.25%. So throughout this pandemic, they have had to increase that. Collect and remit that to the state. They did not have to do that before. This is a result of the United States Supreme Court Wayfair decision. That piece of legislation quite literally has saved the day. It has saved Illinois' budget. It has saved the budgets of state and local governments. That is not to suggest they don't have their challenges, but when the state or others point to the fact that the sales tax is performing so well, it is simply because of that. Had we not passed that, the state would have been in a far worse condition. Now, going forward, beginning of January 1 of 2021, they now have to collect and remit the full sales tax. So that is the state sales tax plus any locally imposed sales tax. So that will accrue even more benefit both to state and local governments. And again, it literally has saved the day.
When you talk to your members, so they call up and say, what are you hearing from them? Are there some areas that are surprisingly doing well? But at the same time, I would guess any number of them are hanging on by their fingernails. And you and I are both in the Springfield, Illinois area. There's a small community of Auburn, and I picked that arbitrarily. But it stands out in my mind when we talk about the $15 an hour minimum wage. There's a Dairy Queen down on Route 4, and it's literally surrounded by cornfields. And Auburn is like maybe a town, I don't know, 5,000 people or something. So many of the lawmakers come from the Chicago area or the Chicago suburbs, which is this major metropolitan area. I don't know if they consciously think about how many towns we have scattered around the state of Illinois that are pretty small. They're 3,000, 5,000. Sometimes they're measured in hundreds. And you might have a local liquor store or a local bar where people just gather to socialize because maybe they're in an agricultural area. But I think of this Dairy Queen, and how is he supposed to double his sales surrounded by cornfields to account for the doubling of his labor? And I just wonder how much of an issue is that I'm bringing up.
Sure, Terry. No, it's a significant issue, as we touched on. I mean, it was a significant issue when it was passed in the midst of a roaring economy. Now, in the midst of a pandemic, when that same Dairy Queen that you reference and many others like them have been closed outright for indoor dining, open just for drive-through or carry-out, you're significantly impacting their sales. They're down, and then you also increase their cost of labor. Their cost of goods have gone up, which many have not been able to pass on the cost of goods to the consumer. So those who say, well, those are simply passed on, that hasn't been the case in the pandemic. Increases have been so great that the consumer would have rebelled. So in many cases, the retailers have eaten many of those costs. So you're exactly right. They have a hard time growing those sales. They really can't. The average consumer, my concern is the average consumer looks at them doing curbside and delivery and says, well, they're open. Or even now where the numbers have allowed us to be open at a reduced capacity, 25%, they say, well, they're open. They're doing fine. No, that's not the case. They're on life support. This is just buying them more time. This can't go on forever. But all the things you mentioned, including the 15 minimum wage, significantly and negatively impact their ability either to remain open or to fully recover once we get outside of this pandemic.
We've had some of these stimulus money where the Congress is working on another one. To what extent has that helped, or is it putting a Band-Aid on cancer, so to speak.
Well, listen, everything helps. So we don't want to speak disparagingly of any one thing. PPP helped. The big grants helped, but I think you have to keep in mind that for every one that got something, there were dozens that didn't, particularly with the big grants. And so again, it was important to help those employers, those particularly those retailers. But I'm not sure I'd call it a Band-Aid on cancer, but it was certainly a very small amount aimed at the smallest. There is a whole lot more need out there if we're going to fully recover.
Are there any good areas in the state? Any bright spots in the economy?
Well, a lot of people, in the economy, a lot of people point at the grocery sector of retail and pharmacy, and say they're doing well. Again, that overlooks the fact that they've had significant increase in costs, not only in terms of labor, as we've already discussed, but in terms of their cost of goods and services, and in terms of their cost of the mitigation measures they've put in place, the enhanced cleaning. None of those things are cheap. They are all ongoing. And those add to your cost of your bottom line as well. Additionally, many have closed, are operating on fewer hours, which also means lost sales. So again, we can look back and we say, well, they're doing great just because they're open. That's not necessarily the case. Would a grocery store want to trade up spots with a restaurant, tavern, or movie theater? Absolutely not. Yeah. But we shouldn't sit there and suggest that all is well just because they're open.
Having been a small businessman in my past, I just feel for these people. I know how that's, you keep waiting for the cavalry to come over the hill to rescue you, and it seems like the cavalry just isn't coming in. Now, we do have the vaccine, fortunately, and that came out at the end of 2020. It's obviously now being rolled out, so that might hopefully result in a reopening of the Illinois economy, of the national and world economy over the course of this year. Is there anything else that the Illinois legislature, which themselves barely met in this last year, but if you had their ear for the governor or the lawmakers, is there anything they could be doing to help retail merchants get past this chapter where they're just trying to hang on?
We're going to come out with some proposals in the very near future exactly on that point. One of the other messages that we have consistently relayed to all of them is do no more harm. Don't add any more costs. Don't do anything that gets in the way of recovery. It's extraordinarily important that we get past this and get back on our feet. As I mentioned earlier, if we're back on our feet, we're the local government's largest revenue generator and the state's second largest revenue generator. So they have a vested interest in us getting on our feet, and so they can afford all of the services that they currently provide and want to provide to Illinois citizens. So there really is do no harm, and then we'll have more for you in the not too distant future on some other things we think that could be done to help us get back on our feet. One example that I have talked about previously, Terry, is property tax payments. You could break those up into 4 payments. Everyone still gets their money, everyone being those who rely on property tax payments, but it's not such a large, significant impact at 2 times out of the year.
Right. And I was going to say, is this? I can understand you don't want to announce the issues and get ahead of yourself now, but would these changes be more of a temporary nature or more of a permanent, or both?
I think most of them would be more of a temporary nature, but some of them might be permanent, and some of them have to do not only with the pandemic, but protecting ourselves, so we don't have we at least have the ability to protect ourselves against, for example, the violence that happened in the city of Chicago over the summer, things like that.
And as a reminder, and I know you did back when Governor Rauner was in, so it was a couple of years ago, but you had an event at the state capitol building that I attended, and it was basically making the point that I think your profit margins, the average profit margin on retail stores is something like 2 cents of every dollar, so only 2%. And that just goes to illustrate, I think, how much cost for every dollar someone is spending. The actual store owner gets to keep just a fraction. And so when we say we're going to add doubling the labor cost, for that merchant to to make that up, they have to increase sales significantly to have an impact.
They have to, and they can't always do that, right? There's a limit to what the consumer will pay, and many consumers now, have been laid off, as we talked about previously. So we're always cognizant of what our consumer base is willing or able to pay. And so many, again, we point to the grocers who have been open and have seen increased sales, but have also had increased costs, and they're unable to pass along all of the costs they experience from their suppliers. So there's a long way to go to get retail back on its feet.
Well, Rob Carr, we'll let you go. We appreciate you taking the time to give us an update. And just as a reminder that all of those who are store owners are often our neighbors, and they employ our neighbors. And as you have made the case, they also are, through the taxes they're paying to local government, help defray the cost of all the services that we get, or a large percentage of those services that we get. So it's important for all of us, even if we're not ourselves in the retail business or employed there, for retail.
And there's significant.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Terry. I'm sorry. And there's significant philanthropic contributors as well, whether it's the local theater, baseball team, sports teams, the food bank, whatever it might be. That's the other side of the coin, is that retail's always there helping meet those needs in the community as well.
Right. We best of luck to all of our retailers. We'll cover your story when you announce whatever changes you're going to be announcing, and hopefully some relief can come for those in the retail business. We want to have a strong economy going forward. Thanks again, Rob Carr from the Illinois Retail Merchants Association.
My pleasure. Thank you, Terry.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.